Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something real today. This might step on a few toes, but that's all right because truth is supposed to wake you up. Men won't say this out loud. They won't post it. They won't admit it at the bar with their friends, but deep down, a lot of men fear older women. Not because these women are difficult, not because they're bitter, not because they're too much. No, they're feared because they are clear. And clarity scares people who are still confused. Let me tell you something about an older woman knowing exactly who she is, because this right here is where the fear really starts. An older woman has reached a point in her life where she is no longer asking the world for permission to exist as herself. She's not trying to fit into a box, not trying to be quieter, softer, or more agreeable just to make someone else comfortable. She has already spent years doing that, and she paid for it with her peace. So now she shows up as she is, fully formed, fully aware, and unapologetic. And that level of self-knowledge is unsettling to a man who is still figuring himself out. See, when a woman knows who she is, she doesn't need constant validation. She doesn't need you to text her every 5 minutes to feel secure, and she doesn't panic when there's silence. She knows what she brings to the table, and she's not begging anyone to notice it. That confidence isn't loud, it isn't arrogant, it's calm, and calm confidence is dangerous because it can't be shaken easily. You can't manipulate it. You can't threaten it. You can't control it with attention one day and distance the next. An older woman knows her values. She knows what matters to her and what doesn't. She knows what kind of love feels safe and what kind of love feels like anxiety dressed up as excitement. She's learned the difference the hard way. So when a man comes into her life with confusion, mixed signals, and emotional chaos, she doesn't romanticize it. She recognizes it. And instead of trying to decode it or fix it, she steps back and asks herself a simple question: does this align with who I am now? That question alone eliminates a lot of men. What really scares men is that an older woman doesn't apologize for her boundaries. She doesn't explain them 100 times. She doesn't soften them so they're easier to accept. She states them once clearly, and then she watches what you do. If you respect them, you stay. If you don't, you go. There's no drama in it, no yelling, no long speeches. Just action. And when a man realizes he can't cross lines without consequences, he feels exposed. An older woman also understands her emotions. She doesn't confuse intensity with love. She doesn't confuse attachment with connection. She knows when she's triggered and when something is genuinely wrong. That emotional awareness means she's not easy to gaslight. You can't tell her she's too sensitive when she's done the inner work to understand her feelings. You can't rewrite history when she remembers exactly how something made her feel. And that kind of emotional clarity makes a man accountable, whether he wants to be or not. There's also this part men don't talk about. An older woman doesn't need to win. She doesn't need to prove a point or be right all the time. She needs peace. And if staying connected to you costs her that peace, she will let you go without turning it into a battlefield. That's frightening, because it means you're not the center of her universe. Her life doesn't revolve around convincing you of her worth. She already knows it. When a woman knows who she is, she stops negotiating with fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of not being chosen. She's already faced those fears and survived them. So a man can't use them as leverage anymore. And when all the usual tools stop working, when charm, silence, and excuses don't move her, what's left is truth. And not every man is ready to meet a woman who lives there. Let me talk to you about the second thing men fear. Even though they rarely admit it out loud, older women see through games, excuses, and half effort, and that kind of vision makes a lot of men uncomfortable. Not because men are bad, but because games only work on people who are still guessing. An older woman isn't guessing anymore. She's paying attention. She's watching patterns, not listening to promises. She's observing consistency, not being distracted by moments of charm. When a man sends mixed signals, an older woman doesn't sit around trying to decode them like a puzzle. She doesn't ask her friends what it might mean, and she doesn't make excuses for behavior that feels off. She understands that confusion is usually the answer. If a man wanted to be clear, he would be. If he wanted to show up, he would. That understanding alone removes the power from games, because games require participation, and she has learned how to stop playing. Older women have already been in relationships where they accepted potential instead of reality. They've waited on someday, believed in I'm not ready yet, and held on to hope longer than they should have. Experience taught them that potential doesn't build a relationship, effort does. So when a man shows up giving the bare minimum, she doesn't dress it up as loyalty or patience. She calls it what it is, and that honesty forces a man to confront whether he's actually ready to be present or just comfortable being admired. What really unsettles men is that older women don't react the way they expect. Silence doesn't panic them. Distance doesn't make them chase harder. Inconsistency doesn't make them try to prove their worth. Instead, it makes them observe. And observation is powerful. When a woman stops reacting and starts evaluating, the dynamic shifts. The man is no longer in control of the pace or the emotional temperature. He's being watched, not chased. An older woman also understands time in a way younger women often don't yet. She knows time is valuable. She knows how quickly years can pass when you're emotionally invested in the wrong person. So she doesn't waste time explaining the same boundary over and over. She doesn't keep reminding a man how to treat her. If she has to teach you how to respect her, she already knows the lesson won't stick. That's not bitterness. That's wisdom. There's a fear that comes from knowing you can't hide behind effort that shows up only when it's convenient. Older women notice when affection is strong only at night, when communication disappears during the day, when support vanishes the moment something gets uncomfortable. They don't confront every inconsistency with anger. They file it away. And when the pattern becomes clear, they make a decision. That quiet decision is often more final than any argument. Men also fear that older women don't reward excuses. Stress, past trauma, busy schedules, and bad experiences may explain behavior, but they don't excuse it. Older women can have compassion without self-betrayal. They can understand your story and still choose not to participate in it. That ability to separate empathy from tolerance is intimidating because it means a man has to take responsibility for his actions instead of hiding behind his circumstances. When a woman sees through games, she removes the safety net of manipulation. There's no room to disappear and come back like nothing happened. No room to test how little effort will still keep her interested. No room to keep her as an option while exploring others. An older woman requires presence, clarity, and consistency. And for a man who isn't ready to offer those things, being truly seen feels far more threatening than being misunderstood. Let me tell you about the third thing men fear when it comes to older women, and this one hits deeper than most people realize. Older women expect emotional maturity, not potential, and that expectation forces a man to face himself. Emotional maturity isn't about age, money, or status. It's about accountability, self-awareness, and the ability to communicate honestly even when it's uncomfortable. And an older woman can tell very quickly whether a man has that or not. An older woman is no longer impressed by charm without substance. She's heard the smooth words before. She's seen the confidence that disappears under pressure. She knows the difference between a man who talks about growth and a man who actually does the work. So when a man shows up talking about who he's becoming, but behaving like who he's always been, she notices the gap. And that gap creates tension because now the man is being measured by his actions, not his intentions. What scares men is that older women don't rush emotional connection. They don't confuse chemistry with compatibility. They let things unfold slowly, watching how a man handles frustration, conflict, and responsibility. They pay attention to how he speaks about his past, how he treats people when there's nothing to gain, and how he shows up when things aren't easy. Emotional maturity reveals itself in moments of stress, not comfort. And older women know that. An older woman also expects a man to take responsibility for his emotional world. She's not interested in raising a grown man, translating his feelings, or guessing what he needs. She believes that if you're old enough to want a relationship, you're old enough to communicate. So when a man shuts down, avoids conversations, or deflects accountability, she doesn't chase him into emotional hiding. She allows him to be exactly who he is, and then she decides if that's enough for her. This is where fear creeps in. Emotional maturity requires vulnerability, and vulnerability means risk. It means admitting fears, insecurities, and mistakes without blaming someone else. Older women create an environment where excuses don't survive because they are calm, direct, and observant. They don't yell to be heard. They don't threaten to leave to gain control. They simply state what they need and watch what happens next. Men also fear that older women won't settle for emotional inconsistency. Hot and cold behavior doesn't intrigue them. It exhausts them. Emotional unavailability isn't mysterious to them. It's familiar. And familiarity without growth is a deal breaker. An older woman doesn't need constant reassurance, but she does need emotional presence. She needs to feel that the man she's with can sit in discomfort instead of running from it. Another uncomfortable truth is that older women expect emotional partnership, not emotional dependency. They don't want to be someone's therapist, savior, or emotional dumping ground. They want mutual support. They want a man who can listen without defensiveness and speak without aggression. That level of emotional balance requires inner work, and not everyone is willing to do it. When a man realizes that an older woman isn't impressed by potential, he understands that he can't lean on future promises. He has to show up now. He has to be consistent now. He has to be emotionally available now. And that kind of presence takes effort, courage, and self-honesty. For men who are still avoiding their inner work, being with an older woman feels like standing in front of a mirror that doesn't lie. Let me explain another thing that quietly unsettles men about older women, even if they never put it into words. Older women are not afraid to walk away from what doesn't serve them, and that kind of independence changes everything. This isn't about being cold or heartless. It's about having learned through experience that staying in the wrong situation costs more than leaving it. An older woman knows the price of ignoring her intuition, and she refuses to pay it again. When a man senses that a woman is capable of leaving, truly leaving, without drama or revenge, it creates a different level of accountability. You can't rely on fear of abandonment to keep her in line because she's already faced that fear. She's already been alone and discovered that loneliness is survivable, but self-betrayal isn't. That realization makes her strong in a quiet way, and quiet strength is often the most intimidating kind. Older women don't threaten to leave to gain control. They don't use ultimatums as leverage. If they speak about leaving, it's because they've already spent time observing, reflecting, and deciding. Their decision isn't impulsive, it's measured. And once it's made, it's firm. Men fear that kind of certainty because there's no arguing with it. There's no last-minute performance that can change the outcome. What's unsettling is that older women don't cling to relationships for identity. They have lives that are full on their own. They have routines, passions, friendships, and inner worlds that existed long before a man entered the picture. So when something feels wrong, they don't panic at the thought of starting over. They evaluate whether staying aligns with their values and emotional health. If it doesn't, they choose themselves. That choice feels threatening to someone who expects a woman to sacrifice her well-being for the sake of love. An older woman also understands that walking away doesn't mean failure. It means clarity. She doesn't view the end of a relationship as proof that she wasn't enough. She sees it as evidence that the connection wasn't right. That mindset removes shame, and without shame, manipulation loses its power. A man can't guilt her into staying by suggesting she's asking for too much or that she'll regret leaving. She's already weighed those thoughts and moved past them. There's also something deeply unsettling about a woman who leaves with dignity. No public scenes, no endless explanations, no attempts to change someone who doesn't want to change. She leaves quietly, carrying her self-respect with her. That kind of exit forces a man to sit with his own behavior, because there's no chaos to distract him from it. The silence becomes a mirror. Men fear this because it exposes the truth. If a woman can walk away calmly, it means she wasn't dependent on the relationship for her sense of worth. It means the relationship was a choice, not a lifeline. And when a man realizes he was chosen freely, he also realizes he can be unchosen just as freely. That awareness demands effort, consistency, and respect. An older woman's willingness to walk away also comes from understanding time. She knows time doesn't circle back. She doesn't believe in wasting years hoping someone will change. She invests where there is growth, reciprocity, and emotional safety. When those things disappear, she doesn't hold on out of habit. She lets go out of self-respect. And that level of self-respect is powerful enough to make anyone who lacks it uncomfortable. Let me tell you something about standards, because this is where a lot of men get uneasy, even defensive around older women. Older women have standards that come from experience, not fantasy, and that difference changes everything. These standards weren't downloaded from social media, romantic movies, or other people's opinions. They were built through trial and error, through disappointment, through learning what feels right and what slowly drains the life out of you. And because those standards were earned, not imagined, they are not easily negotiated. An older woman doesn't expect perfection. She's not looking for a fairy tale or a flawless man who never makes mistakes. What she expects is honesty, effort, and emotional consistency. Those expectations come from knowing what happens when those things are missing. She's lived through relationships where respect showed up only after arguments, where affection depended on mood, and where promises were made with no intention of being kept. So now her standards are rooted in reality. They're practical. They're protective. Men often misinterpret this as being too picky, but that's not what it is. Being picky is rejecting good things because they don't match a fantasy. Being discerning is refusing bad situations because you recognize the pattern. Older women are discerning. They can sense when something feels off long before it becomes a disaster. They don't need chaos to prove that something isn't working. The absence of peace is enough. What makes men uncomfortable is that older women don't lower their standards to keep a man interested. They don't adjust their expectations just because someone shows potential or says the right things early on. They've learned that chemistry without character leads to heartbreak, and attraction without alignment leads to exhaustion. So when a man realizes that charm alone won't carry him, he feels pressure, real pressure, the kind that requires consistency instead of performance. An older woman's standards are also deeply tied to how she feels around a man, not just how he looks on paper. She notices whether she feels calm or anxious, safe or guarded, seen or tolerated. She's not impressed by grand gestures if day-to-day behavior lacks care. She understands that love is built in the ordinary moments, not the dramatic ones. And because of that, she expects reliability, not intensity. There's another part men fear but rarely say out loud. Older women don't compete. They don't try to prove they're better than other women. They don't chase attention or fight for a man's focus. If she feels like she has to audition for a place in your life, she removes herself from the stage entirely. Her standards tell her that mutual interest should feel mutual, not earned through exhaustion. Older women also don't explain their standards endlessly. They might communicate them once, clearly, calmly, without accusation. After that, they observe. If a man respects those standards, he stays. If he repeatedly crosses them, she doesn't turn it into a debate. She turns it into a decision. That decisiveness can feel cold to someone who is used to negotiating their way out of accountability. What men often don't realize is that these standards aren't meant to punish anyone. They're meant to protect peace. An older woman has already learned how expensive emotional chaos can be. She's paid for it with sleepless nights, self-doubt, and lost time. So now, she invests only where there is emotional safety. That doesn't mean she's closed off. It means she's selective. And here's the part that really challenges men. Older women apply the same standards to themselves. They don't demand what they're unwilling to give. They hold themselves accountable for how they communicate, how they love, and how they show up. That balance removes excuses. A man can't claim unfair expectations when the woman standing in front of him lives by the same rules. When a man encounters a woman whose standards are shaped by wisdom, not illusion, he has two choices. He can rise to meet them, or he can walk away feeling intimidated. What he can't do is pretend they don't exist, because standards built from experience don't bend easily. They don't disappear under pressure. They stand firm, quietly reminding everyone involved that love without respect is no longer an option. Let me tell you about the final thing men fear about older women, and this one sits at the core of everything else. Older women don't need a man to complete them. They choose a man to share life with. That distinction alone changes the entire dynamic. Need creates tolerance for behavior that shouldn't be tolerated. Choice creates standards. An older woman has already built a life. She has learned how to stand on her own emotional feet, how to survive disappointment, and how to find joy without depending on someone else to provide it. So when she lets a man into her world, it's not out of desperation. It's out of desire. That reality can be unsettling to men who are used to being needed. When a woman doesn't rely on you for her happiness, your approval, or her sense of worth, you can't control the relationship through withdrawal or affection. You can't threaten to leave and expect fear to keep her compliant. She knows she will be okay with or without you. And knowing that forces a man to show up as a partner, not a lifeline. Older women don't enter relationships to fill a void. They enter them to enhance what's already there. That means a man isn't competing with other men, he's competing with her peace. If being with him creates more stress than solitude, the choice becomes simple. This isn't arrogance, it's self-respect. And self-respect makes manipulation ineffective. Men often fear this because it removes the illusion of power. You can't breadcrumb attention to keep an older woman emotionally invested. You can't disappear and expect her to wait. You can't offer vague promises about the future and assume that will be enough. She's already lived long enough to know that time is precious. She doesn't spend it hoping someone will eventually become who they claim they are. An older woman also understands that love is not possession. She doesn't cling. She doesn't monitor. She doesn't demand constant reassurance. She trusts herself more than she fears loss. That confidence shifts responsibility back onto the man. If he wants to stay in her life, he has to choose her every day, not just when it's convenient. And that level of consistency requires intention. What men fear most is that older women don't center men in their lives. They have purpose beyond romance. They have goals, interests, friendships, and inner fulfillment that don't disappear when they fall in love. So a man doesn't become the sun around which everything else revolves. He becomes a partner walking beside her. For men who crave admiration more than connection, that can feel threatening. Older women also don't confuse independence with emotional distance. They can love deeply without losing themselves. They can be vulnerable without becoming dependent. They don't need to be rescued, fixed, or guided. They want a man who is whole enough to walk with them, not ahead of them and not behind them. That requires emotional security, not ego. There's something powerful about being chosen by a woman who doesn't need you. It means she sees you clearly and still wants you. But it also means you can't hide, you can't slack off. You can't take her presence for granted. Because she didn't build her life around you. She won't destroy it for you either. Older women know that love should feel like peace, not performance. They don't audition for affection. They don't compete for commitment. They don't shrink to be loved. If a man wants to be part of her life, he has to fit into it naturally. If he doesn't, she won't force it. And that calm willingness to let things be what they are is intimidating to someone who relies on control. In the end, what men fear isn't the strength of older women, it's the freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to walk away, the freedom to love without attachment to outcome. When a woman knows she is complete on her own, love becomes a shared experience, not a survival strategy. And not everyone is ready to meet a woman who loves from that place.